Let's look at the African American population. It was about growing counties, about 2 to 1 growth to decline. A lot of the decline occurring in the old southern parts of the United States. And if we look at the Asian population, there were lots of counties there in pink that didn't have enough people of that particular racial and ethnic group to count. But of the ones that were, about 1,600 of the 1,700 counties had growth. So growth in minority populations was clearly pervasive across the United States. Now some of you may also say, well, yeah, I know about central city growth. I mean, I know that's where minority population growth is, isn't it? It's in those central cities. Well, I want you to show you central cities, I want to show you suburbs, and I want to show you non-metropolitan or rural areas. This is central cities, and you can see, this reflects what you might think, only 1% of the growth in central cities, counties in the United States involved non-Hispanic whites. About 59% were Hispanic, about 15-16% were African American, about 18% was Asian. Now when you look at the youth population, look at that pattern of change. A loss of 3.3 million non-Hispanic white kids from central cities, an increase of 4 million Hispanics, etc. Now let's look at suburban areas. I guess their patterns are totally different. Well, not quite. If you look at that first 50.1, that's the percent that was due to Anglo or non-Hispanic white children. So even in suburbs, 50% of all the growth in the total population was due to minority populations, even in the suburbs of the United States. And if you look at children, look what you see. Even in the suburbs, there was declines in the absolute number of non-Hispanic white children, and a phenomenal increase, as you see, in Hispanic children in terms of the total population. Well, what about rural areas? Well, rural areas, only 21% of the growth was non-Hispanic white, meaning that 79% of that growth was due to minority populations, with most of it being due to Hispanic populations. And if you look at the under 18, same pattern basically that we saw for central cities. In fact, non-metropolitan America is racially and ethnically increasingly more like central city America than it is like suburban America, and particularly in terms of population change patterns. Well, but maybe that's only in the South and West. Well, this is the Northeast region. Most of you know where we're talking about now. You can see a substantial loss for the total population, non-Hispanic white population. Phenomenal growth for the total population of Hispanics. If you look at the under 18 population, look at that loss in the Northeast. And although there was overall decline, it would have been much worse had it not been for the growth in the non-Hispanic, or in the Hispanic and in the Asian populations of children. Well, that's the Northeast. Let's look at the Midwest. Midwest declined even at the total pop level of the non-Hispanic white population. Of its 1.5 million of it was due to the Hispanic population. Look at what happens when you go to kids. 1.4 million decline number of non-Hispanic white kids. When you look at the South, now the South had phenomenal growth. It had growth in non-Hispanic whites, it had growth in Hispanics, etc. But pervasive growth, still the majority of that growth was clearly minority populations. And when you look at under 18, notice that even in the South with phenomenal growth, the number of non-Hispanic white kids declined, and was offset by a particularly large increase in the number of Hispanic kids. Finally, the Western region had a growth overall in all of these populations, but still, if you look at it, 87% of the growth was due to minority populations. And if you looked at kids, still had a decline in the number of kids. Well, let's talk about age for a few minutes, because age is a very important factor. This chart shows simply an Anglo, by the way, is the Texas and Southwestern term for non-Hispanic white. And here what we've done is simply look at two groups. Non-Hispanic whites, represented in blue, and the red represents all other population groups. What I wanted to show you, as you get younger, you see the proportion of minority population members gets larger. Okay? Now this is 2000. Now notice, for example, in that less than 5, that difference between the non-Hispanic white or Anglo and the rest of the population is about 17%. Notice what happens by 2010. that 17% becomes 1.6%. And you might be guessing where we're going. This, by the way, is the population pyramid for those two populations. Now, you notice the black kind of pyramidic thing in the middle. That is the minority population. In this case, rather, is simply the Hispanic population. It looks like a pyramid. Now, that other population, basically in this case, is the white non-Hispanic population. Now, it doesn't look like a population pyramid, which is what demographers call these things. In fact, my grandson says that it looks a lot more like a transformer, okay, with big shoulders, and that is the population, and those shoulders, of course, are the baby boomers. Well, this is what we expect by 2050, according to the Census Bureau, and you can see that in most cases we expect, except for very few ages at the end of life, minority populations will dominate in terms of numbers. Well, why do we care about these dull old demographic factors anyway? Why should we care about the age composition or the racial and ethnic composition of our population? Why argue we should care? Because due to a variety of historical, discriminatory, and other reasons, these demographic characteristics are tied to socioeconomic characteristics. They are tied to the resources that people have to buy goods and services in the private sector. They are tied to the resources that people have to pay taxes in the public sector. And as we change our population, if we do not change the socioeconomic factors that go with the demographics, we will, as our change our population, change the very economy, the very socioeconomic structure of America. Now, why do I say that is true? Well, I say that because this kind of slide has always been pretty much the same, or at least for a number of decades. You'll notice if you look down that poverty slide, and by the way, all of these slides have everything for 99 put in 2009 dollars. But we see, for example, that poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanics are about 3 times as high as they are for Anglos or non-Hispanic whites. And the incomes are about 60% of what they are. That is, the incomes for African Americans and Hispanics are about 60 to 65% of what they are for Anglos or non-Hispanic whites. And notice if you compare the median household incomes that the change from 99 to 2009 for Anglos or non-Hispanic whites, Hispanics, and African Americans are all show a decline, and those are significant declines. Non-Hispanic whites, Hispanics, and African Americans all made less in 2009 and 2009 constant dollars than they did in 1999. So there have been tremendous changes, as we know from the economy, but other factors as well. Well, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to show you regions, and I want to show pervasiveness. But here you know what to look at. Just look at how the non-Hispanic black, for example, compares to the Hispanic, compares to the white. Notice the income ranges, and you're going to see a pervasiveness of this. So, for example, it's about 3 times as high poverty for African Americans and Hispanics in the Northeast. It's about 3 times as high in the Midwest. It's about 3 times as high in the South. And it's about 3 times as high in the West. The reason I do that is because sometimes people say, oh, well, I know about in the South. There's a lot of disparity. Disparity is not just a Southern phenomenon. It is an American phenomenon as we look at these population groups. Well, let's look at another socioeconomic indicator, education. And I'll ask you to look at just one figure. In 2010, in the U.S., the percent of Hispanics had less than high school level of education was 38%, compared to about 18% for African Americans, about 9% for non-Hispanic whites. Again, if we look at the Northeast, well, it's 33, 17, and 8. If we look at the Midwest, it's 38, 17, and 9. We look at the South, it's 37, 19, and 11. And we look at the West, it's 40, 12, and 6. Very similar patterns across the regions. Well, what do we project to be the population in the future? Census Bureau projections that we have here show the patterns of change that they project. Those numbers are all in thousands, so that right-hand bottom number is 439 million people. If you look at that total change, the right-hand bar here shows that we expect to have an increase of 157 million people. The percent of that expected to, or the number of that expected to be due to the non-Hispanic white population is 7.6 million out of 197 million. The amount of it expected to be due to non-Hispanic African American population, 17.5 million. Asian population, 23 million. American Indians and all others, about 12 million. And the Hispanic population is expected to contribute 97 million of the 157 million increase. That means a growth of our growth from 2000 to 2050, about 62% of it is expected to be due to the Hispanic population, about 11% to the African American population, 15% to the Asian population, 7% to all other populations, and for the population of non-Hispanic whites, 5%. It is the smallest percentage expected of the total growth of any population group. Well, we will expect to see, and you'll see under 2030 there, if you add 65 plus to the 85 plus, we will have that infamous 1 in 5 Americans that is 65 years of age or older. Now, many of you know that we baby boomers, those of us born between 1946 and 1964, are the infamous group of baby boomers that is expected to strain all kinds of services. And I like to say, as one of those baby boomers, as we go, so goes the country. Yeah, we are an important group of people. And many of you may be a baby boomer like myself, who we also have this advantage of being one of the few groups that have gotten to pay things like Social Security through our entire working life. There's a few baby boomers running around. I won't say I'm one of them. But a few baby boomers running around that says, by golly, I want every cent that's coming to me. Okay, enough on the baby boomers, as wonderful as we are.